Part 37. Infinite Doomsday Start Draws Luodu Mechanic. Author, Shan Mao Aichiji. Chapter 361. So, even when Ruger was drilling underground just now, he let Old Noisy move in the soil around the underground tomb space. Let it check the appropriate position at the edge, instead of entering the real fourth floor of the underground tomb. Because of this, they also failed to get information about Andariel from Old Noisy, including but not limited to where she was before, or whether she was on the fourth floor of the underground tomb. How about we try a drone? The kind with wire control. Even if the circuit is damaged by magic radiation, it's nothing more than losing a chassis and a camera, Ruger whispered in Tia's ear. Although she had done what she should and shouldn't have done, Tia's ears immediately turned red when Ruger blew so softly into her earlobe. She secretly reached out and grabbed the ear of someone who knew she was sensitive and always came to instigate her. She also said very gently to the red ear that was pulled, "Okay." If it were in the past, seeing the two people being so affectionate behind her, Sarah would have turned back to join or interrupt. But now, she was still staring blankly at the direction of the cathedral's crypt. Tyareg was somewhat surprised to see this, and just as she was about to say something to persuade her, she saw her turn around first and asked with a puzzled look on her face, "Look at the ground in front, do you feel that there is a slight bulge there?" Bulge. The two looked at each other, thinking that they had just exploded hundreds of kilograms of explosives in someone's nest, and the energy level was almost equivalent to a Richter magnitude 2 earthquake. It's not normal for the ground to be a little bulging, right? Sarah seemed to have read the meaning in the eyes of the two people, and hurriedly shook her head and continued, "If it is a normal bulge, it is normal, but don't you think that the several bulges over there are too dense, too connected together? It's like someone is digging a tunnel deep underground." "Ghost?" Ruger asked hurriedly. "It's not ghosts." Sarah shook her head. "Speaking of ghosts, I'm afraid no one here has more say than her, the Pope of Ghost. Ghosts dig underground passages with giant ants. Strong acid ants are responsible for melting hard objects such as rocks, and giant ants are responsible for carrying soil. They are not fast, but it's hard to find clues from the ground." Sarah pointed to a tiny bulge in front of the underground tomb. "It doesn't look big there, but it's surprisingly big for the ghost giant ants. Unless the three guys of the Earth Elephant work together to use a giant underground excavator, it's hard to have such a big bulge." "Then, what else could it be?" Tia couldn't help but frown. "Could it be Andariel, X2? Just as Tia and Sarah shouted this name together, a circular hole with a diameter of nearly 10 meters suddenly collapsed on the ground at the edge of the rogue blockade in the middle and back of the battlefield. The area collapsed quite suddenly, and several Nephilim who had just evacuated from the front line and returned to continue fishing and fighting monsters sank along with the brick and stone road surface. Fortunately, these Nephilim were quite agile. Seeing that things were not going well, they immediately stomped on the floor and tried to jump back to the ground with the recoil force. Even some of the fast ones had successfully jumped. However, at this moment, a dark green liquid with a faint glow gushed out directly from the circular hole like an underground fountain. The torrent at that moment was like a high-pressure water flow sprayed by a fire truck. Wherever this high-pressure and high-speed dark green liquid went, even the bricks, stones, and soil were instantly corroded and melted without any residue left. Although those Nephilim were relatively well protected by magic, they were also corroded layer by layer in the air with screams after being hit continuously. First, the armor and clothes, then the skin, then the fat and muscles. Finally, even the whole skeleton was corroded into a pool of mud, and there was no trace of the original highly toxic acid. That's Andariel's highly toxic light cannon. Among the Nephilim around, there were descendants of the brave men who had fought with Andariel in the past, and they immediately called out the dark green light high-pressure venom. When seeing this scene, Ruger and the other two looked at each other and instantly understood what the bulge was. Andariel can also spray poison, and her poison is even more corrosive than the strong acid of the strange giant ant. With these venoms, she can also corrode a channel underground. However, when she releases the highly toxic liquid, she will definitely not do it bit by bit like the strong acid ant, and work slowly and carefully. Once she uses this kind of poisonous light cannon and other tricks, it will cause a local high pressure on the underground soil. Although most of this high pressure will become the driving force for the poison to melt the soil forward, some of it will also be converted into a squeezing force that radiates to the surroundings. This squeezing force is transmitted to the ground, and it is manifested as the vague bulge. To be honest, if Sarah had not observed carefully and was familiar with the surrounding environment, she might not have discovered such a tiny bulge. Even Tia and Ruger seemed to be able to see a little bit, but they were not sure. It was just because they trusted Sarah's judgment and followed her. As a result, Andariel suddenly appeared in the back of the battle formation, which immediately confirmed Sarah's previous judgment. The two of them admired Sarah's careful observation and hurried to work. Because, the area where Andariel appeared was just close to where the two barbarian guys' team was killing monsters and fishing for gems. Big Bear, Little Bear, run, Tia shouted to the two little guys while running towards Ruger's Inuk. Big Bear and Little Bear? Are these the names of the two little guys? Ruger just ran out 2 steps and was startled by the two names that sounded so familiar to Tia. No, how could it be? Tia waved her hands hurriedly. Their real names are too long, Douglas, Kenneth, and they are actually cousins with different surnames, so it's too troublesome to call them. So, these two monkeys, Little Bear number 1 and Little Bear number 2, aren't they Big Bear and Little Bear? Well, it turns out that this is Big Bear and Little Bear. As she spoke, Tia had already jumped on the Inuk, and Sarah ran over there. Ruger was about to squeeze into the driver's seat, but was kicked away by Tia, who jumped on first. "What are you doing?" he asked hurriedly. "Don't steal my lines, okay? This is the question I want to ask, what do you want to do?" Tia closed the car door, said hello to Sarah behind the car, and drove towards Andariel, who was on the side and back of the battle formation. While rushing forward, her voice also floated back from Inuk, "You fake Iron Man, stop showing off your close combat ability." Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shan Mao Ai Chi Ji. Chapter 362. Hurry up, go command the tanks and artillery units, and provide us with support, Tia continued to shout to Ruger. "For such a hard fight in the front, the two of us are enough." "Sir, let us go too." Seeing the two Iron Man rushing towards Andariel, the surrounding rogues also stood up. "Don't get involved, obey orders," Sarah shouted. "Your defense ability is not as good as Ruger's. You just listen to his command, and those troublesome monsters will be left to you." "Yes, sir." The rogues also knew that their melee ability was no match for the two commanders. And after seeing Ruger's melee and long-range abilities just now, their perception of Ruger's combat power level also reached a very high peak. Seeing that he was left behind by the two commanders, under Sarah's strict orders, they didn't say much nonsense, and immediately jumped on their chariots, quietly waiting for Ruger to give orders. Ruger had wanted to fight for the position of vanguard officer, but now 2 of the 3 core members had rushed out, and the rogues behind him really needed a knowledgeable commander, so he could only stay behind. "Okay, listen to my orders," he shouted immediately. "The tank troops turn around and follow me to the front line for support. The artillery is divided into 2 teams. The heavy artillery continues to bombard the catacombs, and the remaining sub-heavy artillery is responsible for clearing the monsters around Andariel. The tank troops converge on both sides of the tanks. Other than that, the original mission remains unchanged and continue to clear the monster tide. Quick, quick, quick." "Yes, sir." The rogues acted quickly after hearing the order. Ruger did not look for his original Leopard 2A4, but compared it with the previous Inuk that had been adapted to the full set of Iron Man armor, and the bunker factory was operated repeatedly to restore another Leopard tank. This one, although the chassis is still the Panther V tank, the engine is still the diesel engine that can provide 1080 plus horsepower from the Puma infantry fighting vehicle. But the main gun has been changed from a 75mm anti-tank gun to a 120mm smoothbore gun. Yes, it is the same model on the Leopard 2A4. At the same time, this tank not only adapts the front cockpit to the iron armor, allowing Ruger to operate while wearing a full set of iron armor, but also makes automation improvements to the rear turret. Of course, it is still the wired electric drive remote control. However, this time, the bullets in the main gun coaxial machine gun were all replaced by tracer bullets by Ruger, and the amount of ammunition was increased. In this way, he only needs to remotely control the coaxial machine gun in the cockpit to fire, and he can correct the aiming position of the main gun through the tracer bullet trajectory. After confirming that the tracer bullet can hit the target, the main gun is fired directly, and its landing point can be almost the same as the position where the tracer bullet hits. It can be said that this is the most suitable chariot for him to use when he is wearing armor and fighting. While he was commanding the rogue troops to change their formation, the situation on Andariel's side was constantly changing. Andariel jumped out of the ground with a terrifying howl. She waved her hands around as soon as she came out, spreading a poisonous cloud of the same dark green color. The Nephilims around, who had finally avoided the poisonous light cannon but did not escape quickly, were covered by the poisonous cloud, and their faces quickly turned green, and soon they fell to the ground and fainted. Those who ran out of the poisonous cloud with faster legs and feet also drank several bottles of alchemical detoxification potions in succession to make the green grassland on their heads disappear. 362363364. However, those Nephilims who had just cleared the green light on their heads had no time to catch their breath, and they heard the chattering behind them and became chaotic again. Turning around, I saw that the huge hole in the ground where Andariel had just come out was actually emitting monsters again. And the monsters here were different from those in the underground tombs. Whether it was a giant spider, a bristly rat, or a toad-like pollution monster, they were all green. It was obvious that these guys were not only highly poisonous, but they might even use the poison cloud as oxygen and the toxins as food. The dark green poison cloud was already scary and dangerous enough, and now with these highly poisonous monsters, the area within the poison cloud had completely become a forbidden zone in the minds of the Nephilim. Those Nephilim who were lucky enough to avoid multiple dead ends one after another no longer had any scruples and fled directly to the direction of the rogue battle formation. As Andariel ran out of the hole underground, the battlefield structure changed significantly. According to Sarah's original layout, the entire battlefield was originally a simple concentric circle structure. The center of the circle is the cathedral and catacombs, and from the inside to the outside are the first-line tank troops, the second-line infantry fighting vehicles, and the third-line self-propelled artillery. However, in order to deal with the massive monsters and exchange space for time, Sarah later changed the battle line from the concentric circle structure surrounding the central cathedral to a fan-shaped structure. The center of the circle is still the cathedral. The fan angle is about 45 degrees to 90 degrees. The reason for this is that, as mentioned earlier, the monastery was originally an east gate fortress built on the mountain. The east side of the fortress is the narrow mountain road into the Tamo Mountains, and the west side leads to the town of Rogue through the stone road. As for the north and south sides of the fortress, it is the main mountain of the Tamo Mountains. Therefore, if the rogue troops want to maintain the concentric circle structure to surround the central cathedral of the monastery, all the troops on the three fronts will have to squeeze into a small area with a diameter of only a few kilometers in the East Gate Fortress. The west side is easy to say, but the troops on the southeast and north sides have almost no depth and can easily be washed away by the sudden outbreak of the monster tide. After changing the battle line from concentric circles to fan-shaped, All the troops on the three fronts are deployed on the west side of the cathedral. Once it is found that the impact of the monster tide exceeds the battle formation's tolerance, the three fronts can retreat to the west in turn. This is the so-called space for time. Use the extended battle line space in exchange for the time to strangle the monsters with firepower. Although it is said to be three fronts, the most important one is the second one, which is the infantry front with enough light armored patrol vehicles as infantry fighting vehicles, and concentrates more than 80% of Rogue's elite troops. Before it, the first tank front on the east side is called a front, but the total number of tanks is less than 10. They were responsible for the elite monsters that emerged from the cathedral and that the infantry line had difficulty dealing with. These tanks were distributed in an area that was 600 meters long from east to west and 2 kilometers wide from north to south. It was conceivable that they could not block all the monsters. Of course, because the tanks only dealt with elite monsters, the tanks would not intervene too much if other monsters did not rush directly towards them to seek death. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shanmao Aichiji. Chapter 363. If these escaped demons continue to charge to the west, they will enter the range of the infantry battle line and be strangled by the rogues. And on the west side of the second line, which is the infantry battle line, is the artillery unit composed of 5 self-propelled mortars commanded by Tia before. Google searched can. The artillery's firing rate is not high, but the range is long enough, and the firepower can cover the entire battlefield from the back to the front, from the west to the east. In order to maximize the firepower advantage of the self-propelled mortars, they actually keep bombarding the cathedral monster nest. The density of monsters there is the highest. The three lines each perform their duties and cooperate with each other, which is the original appearance of the battlefield. Later, those free Nephilim ran out to act as battlefield hyenas, picking up mist monsters and hunting magic gems, which took advantage of the disadvantage of the rogue troops' too wide battle line, and rushed directly from the west to the east of the second battle line through some inevitable gaps in the force. In other words, these Nephilims directly crossed the area where the self-propelled mortars were located and the line of the rogue infantry, and rushed into the front line that was generally responsible for several tanks. Of course, in fact, they did not rush that far forward. Basically, they were in the corner area between the infantry fighting vehicles and tanks. The purpose of the rogues was to clear out the monsters pouring out of the cathedral, so the firepower was naturally concentrated in the area with more monsters. Where there is concentration, there is dispersion. In some marginal areas, the firepower density of the rogues was relatively low. The reason why the firepower density in these areas was low was that monsters rarely arrived here. However, when the monsters in the core area were strangled by the dense firepower in the first time, the probability of living monsters appearing in these areas was higher. So this became a place for the Nephilim hyenas to gnaw on the corpses and rotten meat on the battlefield. At this time, although the situation on the battlefield had changed, it was generally controllable. However, when Andariel used poison to melt the soil, created an underground passage to cross the tank line, and appeared directly in a remote corner where the Nephilim were active, the battle line structure changed completely. Andariel appeared in an area east of the rogue infantry line, west of the tank line, and close to the northern cliff. In this way, the rogue infantry fighting vehicles went directly from the second line to the first line, and the pressure increased. At the same time, the tank troops, especially the several tanks scattered on the north side, were directly attacked from both sides. This is why Sarah needed Ruger to be responsible for commanding the rogue troops. She was busy rushing from the east to the northwest to take Andariel directly, but she didn't want to give up her men. As for Ruger, the tactics he chose were also very simple, that is, to take the tank troops to support the rogue infantry fighting vehicles, and at the same time, a part of them went directly to surround Andariel to cover Sarah. As for the monsters on the east side of the tank troops, they could only let the self-propelled mortars deal with them for a while. Even if they were allowed to rush out in large numbers temporarily, it would be better than letting the tank troops, whose firepower density was not enough, be attacked from both sides. So now, while Sarah and Tia were charging from the center of the east to Andariel in the northwest, Ruger was also gathering tanks at almost the same time, shrinking the front line, and rushing to the northwest behind them. As for the Nephilims who escaped from the vicinity of Andariel, almost all of them ran towards the west side of the rogue infantry fighting vehicle, hoping to rush behind Rogue earlier, that is, further west, so that the rogues could block Andariel in the east for them. However, not all of these Nephilims were fleeing westward. Among them, there was a team of people who, after seeing Andariel appear, not only did not retreat, but instead rushed over at an accelerated speed. The leader of the team was Tia's former teammate, Warden, who was known as the first poisonous necromancer in Rogue Town. It was somewhat untrue to say that he rushed towards Andariel at an accelerated speed. Because the two little barbarians who were his teammates, called Seongda and Seong-er by Tia, were not far from that area. If they hadn't heard Tia's warning that they should flee immediately, the two little guys would have obediently fled to the northwest cliff for a distance. Although they would not be swallowed by Andariel's underground cave, they would be swallowed by the green poisonous cloud. Compared with the obedient two little ones, the remaining few in their team were a little worse. While Seongda and Seong-er retreated to the northwest, the four long-range supporters behind them on the west side rushed towards their original direction. If they were considered to be meeting the two little ones at first, then when they passed by the two little ones but did not turn around, but continued to rush towards Andariel, everyone knew their real purpose. Seeing them like this, the two little ones looked back in surprise, but at the same time they also saw their Aunt Tia who was rushing over from the east. At her call, they hurriedly fled again. Tia Onanuk was relieved to see the two little guys continued to retreat obediently and did not follow the four guys to take risks. But after she recovered, she said to Sarah behind her in annoyance, "I wonder what that bastard Woden wants to do again. And that Giulia. Can't these necromancers be a little more normal?" Sarah almost burst out laughing when she heard Tia complaining about others being abnormal. Fortunately, she reacted quickly and changed to a sighing laugh at the critical moment. However, if you judge carefully, you can still feel the difference. So she hurriedly asked before Tia could think about it, "What kind of person is that Woden?" Although strictly speaking, Woden, Joshua, Tia, Anya, and even Sarah are all childhood friends who grew up together. But because Sarah is a reincarnation, except for her good relationship with Tia for various reasons, she does not have a deep friendship with other children. So she is not familiar with these people. At least because of Tia, she is relatively more familiar with Anya and Minerva. Woden, hearing Sarah's question, Tia quickly recalled. "How should I put it? I used to think he was an ascetic monk-like cultivation maniac. Later I felt that he was very powerful, but he was usually low-key and had a gloomy personality. But after I learned how to make alchemy potions, that guy would come to me to get close to me whenever he had something to do. Later I found out that this guy practiced poison spells by refining other poisons to improve efficiency and even power. I have prepared all the poison formulas with names in Rogue Town for him. But this guy is good in one way. He didn't burn the bridge after crossing the river, and he still stayed in my adventure team. Well, until Brother Lu showed up." Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu Mechanic. Author, Shan Mao Ai Chi Ji. Chapter 364. Generally speaking, this person is very persistent in improving his own strength and has extremely high mobility. Google search to read Tia made the final summary. But no one knows what his true thoughts are. Why is he so eager to improve his strength? Are you eager to improve your strength? Sarah chewed on Tia's words, and suddenly had an idea and asked, could this guy want to use Andariel's toxin to practice? What? Tia was stunned for a moment, then reacted and shouted, that's it? It's very possible, he probably wants to do this. That idiot. Who does he think Andariel is? Any hell monster? Ah, this. Sarah felt a little embarrassed when Tia said this. In fact, she was a little strange about Andariel's poison. Before she was reincarnated, when she was Andariel, she also knew some poison spells. However, her poison spells are more like support abilities. Not only is the form not as rich as the current Andariel, but even the power is far inferior to her. At least, her original poison did not have the ability to corrode a passage underground. It was precisely because of this that she was unable to immediately determine what the bulge on the ground was. Poison spells were completely different, and she didn't have the accompanying monsters in the poison cloud at that time. It can even be said that she had no such thing as a follower at all. What she had was just an army of monsters that were summoned and projected from the burning hell plane, like consumables. But her former lieutenants, the demonic officers who helped her command her Hell Legion, did not know whether it was due to the influence of the World Stone War or changes in the burning hell. In short, she did not communicate with them. Therefore, after seeing that Andariel was now so proficient in poison spells and even created a poisonous monster follower for himself, Sarah gradually developed a suspicion. She thought, could it be said that the current consciousness in Andariel's body did not arise out of thin air? In fact, was he once a subpersonality in charge of poison abilities? Because his main personality left his body, the poisonous personality he left behind gradually exerted his own expertise, turning Andariel into a poisonous demon king? However, this does not make sense. When I came here alone for reconnaissance a few years ago, I didn't realize that Andariel had become so dependent on poison abilities. Oh, maybe my ability at that time was too low to force her to use her trump card? Alright. It seems that we can only think so for the time being. But in this case, wouldn't the relationship between myself and Andariel become like Tia and Pero, old noisy? So, should we really work hard in that direction? For example, let's forget about using radom bugs to control Andariel's body? No. Poison. Although radom bugs have high poison resistance, they probably won't be able to withstand the poisonous cloud around Andariel. Awkward. Not knowing whether it was her successor or her subpersonality who was rebelling against the generals, and hearing her predecessor's reincarnation Tia praising the successor or subpersonality, Sarah felt extremely embarrassed. However, she was embarrassed, and there was someone more embarrassed than her. For example, the one who followed Woden, the poison-type necromancer, and went straight to Andariel, disguised as a bone-type necromancer, was Kalia. Senior Woden, are you planning to kill Andariel? While running, Kalia shouted in a hoarse voice, pretending to be a man. Kill Andariel? Haha, Garcia, you are overthinking. Woden smiled sideways. Then, why are we rushing over now? Kalia, whose pseudonym is Garcia, asked hurriedly, is it to buy time for those rogues? I thought you, Senior Woden, would never do such a thing. I didn't expect that. I misunderstood you. Senior Woden, it turns out you are a good person. Woden was given a good guy card for no apparent reason, and he really didn't know what to say. He originally thought that this necromancer, who didn't like to talk much but called him Senior one after another, would be a more suitable long-term teammate. But looking at it now, why doesn't this guy like to talk a lot? Basically, I offend others whenever I speak, so I have the self-awareness to take the initiative not to speak too much, so as not to expose myself. You were fooled, you were really fooled. I had never thought that there would be a chatterbox among the necromancers. Embarrassing, the scene is very embarrassing. Seeing that Woden didn't reply for a long time and just rushed in the direction of Andariel, Kalia felt somewhat strange. At this moment, a gust of wind blew by, bringing with it a cloud of Andariel's poison. Kalia inhaled a little bit and immediately felt dizzy and wanted to fall to the ground. She felt something was wrong here, and thought that although her poison resistance was not particularly high, it was still above average among the Nephilim. If he was almost knocked unconscious by poison while wearing a mask, wouldn't it mean that the others would die if he touched them? Looking at Woden in front of him again, he found that although he was also affected by the poisonous cloud, not only was he unguarded, there was even a faint smile on his stiff face. That zombie face, combined with the blurry sunshine under the clouds, plus the poisonous cloud, is as weird as it is weird, as scary as it is. Senior, Kalia asked tentatively. He, that guy really didn't lie to me. Andariel's poison is indeed the most powerful poison here. Woden didn't know whether he was too excited and wanted to share his feelings with others, or whether he lost his self-control due to the poison. Anyway, he actually said what was in his heart. With these toxins, I will definitely be able to break through the current bottleneck. Maybe I can step out of that scene and restore the power of the ancient Nephilim. Ancient Nephilim. Hearing this strange and familiar term, Gialia's heartbeat accelerated involuntarily, and her brain was a little dizzy for some reason. In a daze, she seemed to remember something. Ancient Nephilim. Oh, yes, the so-called necromancer was originally a priest of the Lasma cult. The Lasma cult was established by the disciple of the first generation of angel-demon hybrid Nephilim Lasma and the star dragon Tagoo, Mondan. Because they followed Lasma through the entire creation war of the ancient sanctuary, the Lasma cult has the most complete knowledge inheritance about the truth of this world. They know how powerful humans, that is, the Nephilim, used to be. Those powerful people called the ancient Nephilim can even rival or even surpass the strength of the 5 angels of the high heaven and the 7 demons of the burning hell. Well, that's how it is. This necromancer Woden also inherited the knowledge of the Lasma cult. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shanmao Aichiji. Chapter 365. Oh, wait, it's not surprising that he knows this, but how do I know it? Thinking of this, Gialia felt a splitting headache and stopped walking. Google search reading. My mentor is a paladin, he shouldn't know this. Even if he knows, it's unlikely that he will pass it on to me. Although my magic depends half on talent and half on the notebook left by my father, I can be absolutely sure that there is no such information on the notebook left by my father. Even if there is, the mentor who holds them will know it first. The Order. No, the Order has many secrets and has shared many with me, but I can be sure that they have never revealed these things to me or anyone else. They didn't even use the term ancient Nephilim. They only know Nephilim, and they think that the word Nephilim itself is a supreme honor and a symbol of identity. So, how did I know these things? Gialia had an unbearable headache, but she seemed to have some vague understanding. On the other side, although Woden in front found that the bone-based death magic Garcia suddenly stopped, he just shook his head indifferently and continued to rush towards the poisonous cloud around Andariel. In order to get more poison as soon as possible, he didn't even care about the poisonous cloud monsters rushing towards him, but threw them to the 2 rogues behind him to deal with. It's strange. Woden didn't care about the lives of other teammates, just rushed towards the poisonous cloud to improve his own strength. So he didn't feel anything strange about the behavior of Seongda Seong and Gialia's escape or stop. In his opinion, that was normal. However, the 2 rogues were not the beneficiaries of the poisonous cloud, but the poison magician Woden was not worried that they would turn around and leave like the barbarians or bone mages, and still gave them orders through gestures. The strange thing is here. Obviously, the 2 rogues should have left, but they still obeyed Woden's arrangements, and completed the task without any discount. It seems that they have completely lost their minds and are just tools in Woden's hands. Originally, the one who discovered this should be Gialia, who was closest to them. but now her mind was full of the three philosophical questions of who am I, where do I come from, and where am I going? Oh, no. It was the question of how did I know the secrets of the Lasma cult. So she didn't even notice the problem of the two rock girls. Even if a monster ran over to attack her, she would be scared or even killed directly. The ones who discovered the problem of the two rock girls were the barbaric little guys who were almost running to the cliff at the edge of the East Gate Fortress in the northwest. They were called the two bear kids by Tia. Look, why are the two sisters in a wrong state? It seems that they are completely different from before, the elder brother asked the younger brother. Well, when they crossed with us just now, I wanted them to run with us, but they didn't even turn their heads, as if they didn't see us at all, the younger brother replied. Damn it, why didn't you tell me such an important thing earlier? Isn't this what Master said, the look of being controlled by someone's mind? The elder brother was very anxious when he heard this, and turned around to go back to save people. Those two sisters have been taking good care of us, we must rescue them. Okay, the younger brother immediately followed. It didn't matter if they moved here, but Tia, who was rushing over there across the entire Andariel poison cloud circle, immediately noticed that the two little guys were abnormal. She hurriedly waved to the two to turn back, and followed their eyes to look at the two rogues, and soon found that they were abnormal. Then, Sarah also saw the abnormality under her reminder, and the whole person immediately became furious as if conditioned reflex. I see, I see. I was wondering why the two of them would follow that Woden. It turns out they were controlled. That bastard must have joined the cult. Among those XXX in the cult, only they still know how to control humans mentally. Tia, kill him first. Okay. Tia and Sarah accelerated again and rushed towards Andariel. However, the angle shifted slightly, leaning towards the direction where the poisonous necromancer Woden was. On the other side, Seongda and Seong-er saw that Tia kept persuading them to retreat quickly, and saw that she rushed towards the two rogues, looking like she was going to help them save people, and finally slowed down their forward speed. They were also a little hesitant, whether to retreat first or continue to save people regardless of the consequences. Just as they were hesitating, the situation over there changed again. Andariel cleared all the Nephilim around him and immediately turned around to scan the surroundings. As a result, she found that the enemy closest to her was the necromancer Woden, who had been hiding behind her and moving towards the poisonous cloud. Seeing him rushing towards her, Andariel seemed to see a hyena rushing towards her Lion King. She was furious and roared to the sky. Well, her fiery red hair always pointed straight to the sky, like a burning flame. There was no need to change her hairstyle by anger. With a long roar, she seemed to announce to everyone on the field that anyone who dared to challenge the dignity of the king would pay the price with blood. At that moment, even though the poisonous cloud he had been looking for was not far in front of him, Woden was still frightened by Andariel's roar and stopped. It seemed that he had already sensed the murderous intention of the poisonous demon king and was wavering between fighting to improve strength and turning around and running away quickly. He hesitated, but Andariel would not wait for her. The next second, the poisonous cloud around Andariel flashed a crystal clear green light. In this green fluorescent bloom, Andariel's huge body of nearly 6 meters in height rushed to Woden at a very fast speed. Woden's height is not short, at least 1.85 meters. Among male Nephilim, he is also above average. But in front of Andariel, he is as weak as a newborn baby, and can only look up at the giant with overwhelming power in a daze, not knowing what to do. Or, knowing that no matter what he does, it will be useless. He stared at Andariel blankly, as if he saw a cruel smile on her huge but charming face. Then he saw her red devil's right claw raised high and pounced on him. At the same time, the tips of her 5 fingers flashed green fluorescence that was as solid as substance. Under the guidance of the claw, the green light on the fingertips drew green lines in the air, extending downwards continuously until it crossed Woden's entire body. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shan Mao Ai-chi-ji. Chapter 366. In just a moment, the green brush created 5 parallel green lines on Woden's body that were almost vertically downward. Soon after the green lines were completed, a strong green fluorescence burst out like a twinkling starlight. I hope readers will remember our domain name Taiwan Novel Network rightward arrow. However, at the same time, Woden's eyes, which were originally full of spirit, dimmed. The next moment, the green fluorescence disappeared, and a few wisps of green smoke sizzled around. Andariel watched with interest as the green smoke merged into the poisonous cloud around him, but he casually snapped his fingers with his demon claws. With this crisp sound, Woden's body was directly divided into 6 sections by 5 green lines, and the 6 broken parts of the body fell to the ground. Just after it hit the ground, the fragments melted quickly under the shroud of the poisonous cloud, and only a pile of residues that could not be told whether it was black or dark green remained there. Woden actually died just like that. The first poisonous necromancer in Rogue Town was killed by Andariel's casual claw. Silence. Deathly silence. Everyone seemed to be shocked by the scene and lost the ability to move. It was as if time was forever imprisoned in the second. Shocking, it was too shocking. It was not that there were no Nephilim who died in Andariel's hands before. Even the number of deaths was close to double digits. However, in the minds of others, those would be killed instantly by boss-level monsters. Their death was expected by everyone. But Woden was different. After all, he was known as the first poisonous necromancer in Rogue Town. Moreover, even among all the necromancers, he is undisputedly one of the top 3 strongest, and even the strongest and most powerful competitor. Today, he may already be the strongest. Among all the Nephilim, he is also very likely to be among the top 10. In other words, he, Woden, is likely to be one of the top 10 masters in Rogue Town today. He represents the highest level of strength of the human survivors today. At least, in the minds of the free Nephilim, he has this status. However, such a person, facing Andariel's casual claw, died quietly without even a decent resistance. Seeing this scene in the eyes of everyone, how could they not be shocked and terrified, and even their thoughts stagnated and their brains crashed. However, not everyone's time was frozen. For example, those who had seen famous masters being killed in one stroke were not affected much. For example, those masters who had been seen by others kill masters in one stroke. Well, if you really count, it seems that Lugger, Sarah, and Tia are all among the top masters. Lugger once killed the paladin master Daniel in seconds. If you think that the deputy of the cult is a bit exaggerated as a master, then he once killed Austin, the chief paladin of the cult. Although that guy was resurrected later, Lugger's record will not be affected. After all, in the eyes of the audience, the difference between killing that person in one move and beating that person to the point of near death and losing combat power is not that big. As for Sarah, she has fought hundreds of battles of all sizes and defeated countless monsters. Blood Raven Morena and Bloody Countess were all defeated by her. Several of the Lugers who had seen her pierce the Bloody Countess with one shot were in the battle. As for Tia, relatively speaking, there are not many dazzling records. However, this is mainly because she, a big bomber, has been used to providing firepower support for Lugger. So she didn't need to fight one-on-one easily. But her real strength is definitely not inferior to the other two. What's more, she is a Diablo. Just based on this last point, who dares to question her strength? So, when Woden was killed by Andariel's claw, the 3 people's actions were not affected much, and they still rushed to the core battlefield 2 in front and 1 behind. At the same time, As Woden turned into a poisonous cloud and merged into Andariel's body, the two rogues controlled by him also fell to the ground with two plops. The sound of the two people fainting and falling to the ground was like two drops of water falling on the calm lake, stirring up ripples. In an instant, the frozen time started to run again. In the eyes of everyone, it seemed that everything was connected with the previous scene. However, the position of Lucia's three people and two cars over there seemed to be a lot forward in their eyes. It was like teleportation. So there are always people who say that time stillness is likely to be a two-sided relationship with teleportation. The two are two sides of the same phenomenon. As the people around came to their senses, Andariel looked around again. This time, the enemy closest to her, apart from the two rogues who had just fallen to the ground, was only the bone-type undead method, Garcia, who was still trapped in his own thoughts. That was Gialia, who was dressed as a man. "Brother Garcia, don't stand there, run away!" the two barbarian guys shouted while running. Tia, who was opposite, almost got angry when she heard this. "I thought, you two naughty kids also know that there is a word called run away in this world, right? You only talk about others, what about you?" Tia felt her blood boiling for a moment, and she wanted to beat someone up. But domestic violence against two children is not good. Although the two naughty kids are 1.78 meters tall and 1.81 meters tall, they are both adults. But, it is still not good after all. In this case, Tia can only vent her anger on another target. "Hold on," she shouted to Sarah behind her. Her left hand continued to fiddle with the steering wheel, and her right hand held another joystick next to the gear lever, remotely controlling the MG3 communication machine on the remote weapon station in front of the car, and fired at Andariel. A string of 62mm tungsten core armor-piercing bullets instantly penetrated the green poisonous cloud around the Queen of Pain. Although the bullet was visibly smaller, it still hit Andariel's solid bronze skin. Break the defense? Or not break the defense? This is a problem. But one thing is certain, this string of bullets did very little damage to Andariel, but it directly attracted her hatred. After a howl, the guy condensed a green light poison ball with his backhand, and threw it directly at Tia's neck like a discus. Without time to carefully distinguish the results of the attack, Tia hurriedly turned the steering wheel and dodged the poison ball by a hair's breadth, but immediately another string of bullets hit her. However, this time, Tia also used tracer bullets to correct the trajectory while shooting, and it was not until the 89th bullet that she hit the giant Queen of Pain. "Good guy, as a driver, you can control a machine gun by yourself? Why didn't you tell me?" Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shan Mao Ai-Chi-Ji. Chapter 367. Sarah saw that Tia hit Andariel twice in a row, and the second time the trajectory was obviously not just shooting straight at the front of the car, so she immediately reacted and asked, "This thing? You also saw that this thing is not something that ordinary drivers can use." Tia continued to fight. "And, in order not to rely on electronic circuits, this thing can only be estimated by tracer bullets to make a rough aiming. It's an absolute money-eating beast when it comes to wasting bullets. Even if I install it for you, you will not be willing to use it in the end." Tia has basically used all the remote control weapon stations made by Ruger, big or small. Or it should be said that she is a natural weapon tester. Google searched can. She is naturally very clear about the advantages and disadvantages. What's more, this version uses a joystick to control the direction of the motor movement, has no aiming mechanism, and can only rely on visual inspection of the muzzle and the trajectory of the tracer bullet to correct the aiming. It was she who urged Ruger to make it. What do you mean the driver must need an electronic chip to use the aiming system? Don't worry about it. Just make do with it. It's fine as long as it works. Tia's original words. After all, with her ability to calculate the landing point of the shell by looking at the muzzle of the artillery, She has no problem using this simple weapon station. Don't think that she just wasted 7 or 8 bullets to hit a giant over 5 meters tall again. That's because she was moving around the guy at a speed of nearly 30 meters per second at a few hundred meters away. In addition, the MG3 itself has a somewhat high firing rate. It only takes 7 or 8 bullets to correct the trajectory again. That's already as fast as a ferry. Sarah, who was controlling the 7mm heavy machine gun on the roof of Inuk in the back row, talked to Tia and tried to turn the muzzle to shoot Andariel. However, even though she had a sight, it was not until the 6th or 7th bullet after firing that she hit the first time. By comparing, she immediately understood what Tia said, knowing that what the bomb girl said was true, and no longer entangled in the problem of the remote control weapon station. However, I'll leave this to you. Speaking of guns, I still prefer my own. While speaking, Sarah had already jumped out of Inuk, clenched her hands in the air, and summoned her dragon-like spear out of thin air, pointing the tip of the spear at Andariel, and rushed over there. Dragon Lance, also known as Dragon Riding Lance, or Dragon Knight Lance. As the name suggests, it is a large spear extended from the medieval heavy knight's lance, specially used by knights on dragon backs. Hard, sharp, and unstoppable. However, it requires the knight to have a giant dragon mount to maximize its power. At this time, Sarah jumped out of Inuk, relying on the lugger rocket engine booster hanging on the Iron Man. Although she could launch a high-speed attack, she could not output continuously. However, in Sarah's view, the main purpose of her shot was to attract Andariel's hatred from Tia. As for whether she could stab a second shot, it was not something she needed to consider now. Roar. The mysterious connection made Andariel abandon the metal beast that was swaying in front of him as soon as he found Sarah rushing over. He roared at her, and the toxic Demon King stretched out his sharp and strange green fluorescent claws to point at the enemy, and also rushed towards her with big strides. This man and demon, one spear and one claw, one previous life and one present life, at this moment, actually attacked each other. Sarah's speed was getting faster and faster under the effect of the rocket booster, and she was instantly overloaded by at least 10 times the acceleration of gravity. This means that in just 1 second, her vector speed has exceeded 100 meters per second. At such a high speed, the sharp dragon spear in her hand cut through the air, and the sound of wind and thunder was faintly heard. On the other side, Andariel rushed over on foot. Although he was tall and strong, he was immediately outdone in momentum. It seemed that seeing that the offensive situation was not favorable to him, the toxic Demon King accelerated and accumulated magic power again, preparing to release a big move. The poisonous cloud around her instantly glowed, just like the time when she suddenly rushed to the poisonous necromancer Woden. "Be careful," Tia shouted. "Don't worry," Sarah's voice, which was blown by the airflow, came from the air. Before she finished speaking, Andariel's green fluorescence rose to its brightest, and then suddenly dimmed. At the same time, the huge body of the toxic Demon King had completely disappeared. And a trace of poisonous cloud appeared faintly behind Sarah. "No, she's going to go behind you," Tia shouted, and the front of the car turned, and immediately controlled the machine gun to shoot at the growing poisonous cloud. However, this time she didn't hit a single shot. Because the Hell Demon King actually made a feint and flashed out from somewhere else. Tia saw that she finally appeared in front of Sarah. Although she felt a little frustrated that she was being calculated, she quickly adjusted herself and immediately turned back to provide fire support to Sarah. That's right, she thought. If she really ran behind Sarah, with her rocket booster speed, Andariel still couldn't hit her in front. Intercepting Sarah in the middle of the way can not only prevent her from accelerating further, but also catch her off guard, which is reasonable. I just hope Sarah won't be really confused by the toxic Demon King's move. Thinking so in her heart, she turned the car back and fired at the giant figure again. At the same time, She also looked at Sarah in the air. But this look surprised her. Because Sarah, holding the dragon spear, actually pierced Andariel directly. Huh? Huh? How could this happen? Yeah, how could this happen? Sarah, who hit the enemy with one move, was also full of question marks. She herself couldn't believe that her straightforward move with a huge pre-swing actually hit Andariel. Moreover, that guy had used the poison cloud flash to disrupt her steps before. But now looking at it again, what is the use of flash to disrupt the enemy's pace? This guy actually took the initiative to flash in front of Sarah's gun, which was equivalent to actively bumping into the gun. What the hell is this? Looking at Andariel, she was also confused, not knowing what happened. Poison cloud, look at the poison cloud around her, it is much thinner than before, and it is almost dissipated. The sound of Ruger's muffled tank in the leopard tank came from not far away. That guy's poisonous cloud is the source of her magic power. Quick, continue to lead her out, don't let her go back to the cave. Hearing Ruger shouting, both Sharashia and Andariel looked at the cave she was in before, and finally found a clue. It turned out that there was a faint poisonous cloud on the ground between the two, like an oil pipeline, which was infusing Andariel with new poisonous clouds. And those green monsters that were originally around Andariel and were now coming from the cave to reinforce their master, the green grasslands on their bodies also seemed to have withered a lot, as if from summer to autumn. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shanmao Aichiji. Chapter 368. Sure enough. Seeing this, the two of them looked at each other and confirmed Ruger's previous judgment. That's good, that's good. Sarah finally breathed a sigh of relief when she saw this. If Andariel was really strong enough not to be weakened by the thin magic outside the monster's lair, then this battle would be really difficult to fight. It can even be said that it is impossible to fight at all. Just look at the strength shown by Andariel when he flashed and killed Woden in seconds before. It really showed the strength of a hell-level boss-level monster to the fullest. Although Sarah was not scared by Duan's flash, she was still inevitably a little uneasy. Now it's good, after Ruger in the back row saw the root of the problem at a glance, Sarah's heart finally settled down again. Looking at Duan again, the new generation of Andariel who specialized in poisonous ability, she looked at the dragon spear on her chest, and the confusion in her eyes was gradually replaced by anger. And in that rage, there was also a trace of pain that could not be concealed. Roar! With another wild roar, she raised her claws to cut it off. However, when she clawed it down, in addition to making it vibrate, the vibration caused another sharp pain in her chest and abdomen. But the spear of unknown material was still sticking straight there. On the other side, Sarah had removed the rocket booster behind the armor. Through the material energy conversion method, she gave the Iron Man armor several small wings, and she used those structures to half-glide to the side and back of Duan like wearing a flying squirrel suit. At this time, seeing that guy was about to attack her dragon spear, Sarah hurriedly stretched out her hand to the thing, and saw that the dragon spear instantly turned into a ball of silver light, flashed in the air, and returned to her hand. Fortunately, she acted quickly, and when the dragon spear returned, Andariel had already sprayed a fluorescent green breath at the original position of the spear. Although the spear did not hit, the ground sprayed by the breath was immediately corroded and melted into a small pit. The poison was the same poison that Duan had used to corrode the underground passage. At the same time, the poison cloud path leading to the poison cloud beside her in the underground passage also began to change from a stream to a river. The poisonous clouds were like a torrent in the pipeline, pouring towards Duan. No, we can't let her accumulate power. Sarah immediately noticed the change in the poisonous cloud and shouted. While speaking, she circled behind Duan and intercepted the army of Ching grassland monsters that were supporting their master along the poisonous cloud pipeline. With a poke of the dragon spear in her hand, a giant monster had its throat pierced. She shook the spear in her hand, and saw that the blade spider radum worm that had not appeared for a long time had drilled into the giant monster's brain along the gap in the dragon's spear. After a moment, this huge beast with a sturdy body and strange green fur like the green grassland became her new mount and carried her to rush towards Andariel again. "I'll hold her back. Tia, Ruger, you can bomb as much as you want, as long as you can block her rat hole." "Rat hole?" Ruger thought, "Your rat is really big. Judging from this hole, your rat can swallow a lion or tiger alive in one bite, let alone a cat." Although he complained in his heart, Ruger cooperated on the surface, and agreed with a yes and turned the second stage magic modified leopard tank towards Tia. Tia was dealing with Andariel head-on at this time. Seeing Sarah coming to replace him as the main tank, he immediately cooperated to withdraw from the front line, but turned the car head and headed straight for the hole in the ground. After shooting down several dark green monsters, she soon arrived near the deep cave entrance. However, she did not stop for a moment, but passed by there and continued to rush to the northwest. What happened? Ruger behind was confused, and she stood up from the driver's seat on Inuk and shouted to the two barbarians who were holding Rogue not far away, "You, get in the car quickly." It turned out that while Sarah and others were fighting with Andariel, the two bear children, Big Bear and Second Bear, had already run to the side of Rogue who had fainted, and each of them picked them up by the waist. When they fled back, the two did not forget to hold up the still dazed bone necromancer Garcia. It would be fine if the two children ran by themselves, but now they were carrying 3 valuables, so their speed would naturally not be high. Tia discovered this and hurriedly drove over to help them continue to evacuate. "Can you drive?" Tia asked the two. "Car? What is it?" "A carriage." "What does it mean to drive?" "To drive a pack animal." "That means I don't know how to do it." Tia sighed and shook her head, opened the door for them casually, and said, "Okay, stop talking nonsense, throw the ones you have in your hands into the car. You, hold the door handles and hold them steady." Under Tia's guidance, the two little ones learned very quickly, and completed all the actions in a few seconds, and the people were also hanging on the outer armor on both sides of Inuk. So Tia stepped on the accelerator and sent the 5 people directly to the vicinity of the Inuk infantry fighting vehicle of the rogue force on the west side. At this time, seeing Sarah and her beast charging at Andariel alone like the last night, the surrounding rogues were excited and wanted to rush over to help. Fortunately, Tia arrived in time and tried her best to dissuade them. In addition, Sarah discovered the situation here and immediately gave the rogues a death order to obey Tia and Ruger's command, which allowed the rogues to temporarily settle down. However, as time went on, Sarah gradually showed signs of fatigue. The most important point is that the green beast she used as a mount does not have infinite endurance. Every time Sarah let it charge at high speed, so that she could use the dragon spear to stab Andariel who wanted to attack others, the green beast's physical strength would drop significantly. Soon, Sarah found the clue. It was still the problem of poisonous cloud. Although Sarah had iron armor, as long as the outer armor was intact, she was theoretically completely immune to poisonous cloud. But Andariel's poisonous cloud would not only affect people if they breathed or touched it, but it was also corrosive. Although Sarah's iron armor could repair the outer armor corroded by the poisonous cloud in real time through a small amount of energy and material conversion, the repair power was limited. Therefore, Sarah's attack method is the same as that of a medieval knight. She gains high momentum by charging and uses the sharp edge of her spear to stab Andariel. One move staggered, and immediately escaped. After this attack and escaped, she was within the range of the poisonous cloud for no more than 2 seconds. In this way, her iron armor is fine, but the green beast mount cannot be replenished by the poisonous cloud, so the ability is reduced by 1 point for each point of physical strength consumed. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Doomsday Start Draws Luodu Mechanic. Author, Shan Mao Ai-chi-ji. Chapter 369. Sarah wanted to throw it away and change a mount, but Andariel chased her relentlessly and forced her to continue attacking to avoid being caught off guard by the guy's poisonous claws. At this time, Ruger's vanguard tank troops had rushed back from the first line of defense to the second line of defense. The average distance to the west of the rogue infantry fighting vehicles was no more than 300 meters. In other words, most of the tank troops could fire at Andariel. However, under Ruger's order, except for the two fastest Leopard 2A4s, which were allowed to shoot with steel needles, the rest, including the Leopard tanks and the Horsebear tanks, were ordered not to attack, but to continue to move west to support the rogue infantry fighting vehicle troops to retreat. There was no way. As most of the main forces of Rogue were involved in the fight with Andariel, more and more monsters rushed out of the catacombs. The thick-skinned and hard-armored monsters that were originally handled by the tanks were now unattended. Led by these sharp knives, the monster tide gathered together again and attacked the west with great force. As a result, the pressure on the rogue infantry fighting vehicle troops responsible for dealing with them doubled. The rogue troops responsible for the second line of defense, Ruger called them infantry fighting vehicle troops, but their core vehicles were just thin-skinned enough light armored patrol vehicles. Not to mention, compared with real infantry fighting vehicles, their armor is not as thick as armored transport vehicles. Although the most types of monsters are melee, there are also many ranged units among them. In particular, the higher the level and the stronger the ability of the monsters, the more proportion of them are ranged. Although the long-range attacks of monsters are mainly aimed at the long range in the cold weapon era, that is, 100 steps, with a maximum distance of 60 meters to 80 meters, not all monsters' long-range attacks cannot shoot farther. What's more, there is a way to accumulate a little to make a lot. So as a new wave of monsters approached, although the Inuks were equipped with heavy machine guns that could effectively suppress the Hell-level monsters within a range of 500 meters, they still had to continue to retreat in order to avoid casualties caused by sporadic long-range attacks. At this time, the several magic-modified tanks sent by Ruger based on the chassis of the World War II Zoo became the key to helping Inuk complete the retreat. It can even be said that if these tanks did not help but participated in the siege of Andariel, at least half of those Inuks would be killed by the monster tide. But what was the result of such sacrifice? Those 75mm caliber capped armor-piercing bullets of the Horsebears were definitely more than enough to bully the ordinary version of the Hell monsters, and there was no problem dealing with the elite version or the enhanced defense version, but against Andariel? After all, those were just old ammunition with a warhead of less than 7 kilograms and a penetration depth of just over 100 millimeters at a distance of 1 kilogram. In order to save costs, Ruger did not distribute many new armor-piercing shells to them. When Ruger rushed to help Sarah, he also used the 105 millimeters high-pressure rifled gun on his Leopard to test a capped armor-piercing shell APC. As a result, the soft metal cap on the outermost side of the ammunition was corroded soon after entering the poisonous cloud area. Under wind resistance, the shell quickly deviated from the shape. Even the APC made by Ruger for the 105mm gun was like this. The old shells on the Horsebear that were exchanged from the underground arsenal did not need to be considered. If 1 out of 10 hits, it is good. However, with Andariel's thick skin and flesh, what effect can those small tanks have if they fired twice to hit her once? So instead of letting them participate in the battle to siege Andariel, it is better to let them play to their greatest advantage and help the Inuk troops complete the retreat. The only thing that was a bit tangled was the hardcore armor-piercing projectile APC fired by the 75mm caliber but 70 times caliber tank gun of the Little Leopard, which should be able to pose a certain threat to Andariel. But after a few hesitations, Ruger finally let it go with the Horsebear No. 4 to help Inuk. His idea was that he should also add a trump card insurance to Rog and others. In case a monster like Andariel's adjutant rushed over, they would not be able to fight back for a while. Waiting for Ruger to take the time to help, it would be easy for distant water to not be able to save the nearby fire. So the battlefield temporarily became like this. Taking Andariel as the benchmark, the area about 600 or 700 meters long from her east to the original cathedral crypt area fell into the hands of monsters again. About 200 or 300 meters southeast of her, there were two Leopard 2A4 tanks that turned back to help. Sarah still rode the huge green-haired beast to fight Duan at close range. Between Sarah and the Leopard 2 is the modified Leopard tank driven by Ruger, whose main gun was replaced with a 105mm high-pressure rifled gun. The diesel engine horsepower of the Puma infantry fighting vehicle on the modified Leopard is nearly one-third weaker than that of the two Leopard 2s. However, the design idea of the entire vehicle from the beginning was to let Ruger, wearing a full set of homemade Iron Man armor, operate alone. In addition, the modified version has at least half a century of time bonus in the field of materials, so the weight of the entire vehicle was controlled within 30 tons, far less than the 45 tons of the original Leopard. In this way, coupled with the 1080 plus horsepower engine, the power-to-weight ratio of this modified Little Leopard engine is even higher than the 1500 plus horsepower of the Leopard 2A4. 1080/30 equal 36, /U003E, 1500/5527. Therefore, even though Ruger was unable to bring out all of his driving skills because he was wearing a full set of Iron Jamin armor, the modified Little Leopard on the battlefield was much more maneuverable and flexible when fighting Andariel. Two Leopard 2A4s are even better. Seeing him driving a tank of dozens of tons like a nimble rog running through the forest, or doing some fancy things like extreme lane changes, Sarah couldn't help but half-jokingly half-emotionally said, "How about that, just come here and be my mount. Don't even think about it. He's my mount." Before Lugger could speak, Taya, who was arranging the retreat of Lugger's Inuk, immediately turned around and shouted loudly. "That's not what I meant. That's not the kind of mount I'm talking about," Sarah replied, somewhat dumbfounded. "Oh, what nonsense am I talking about? Who knows what you are talking about?" Taya didn't know whether she really didn't understand or pretended not to understand. After throwing the Ruger Inuk to a group of Rugers for temporary use, Taya immediately summoned a small caliber coil gun. "Carry onto the shoulder armor." She and Lugger can now share more than half of the logistics space. As long as Lugger agrees, they can use the logistics space as an item courier. Therefore, Lugger's coil gun, which had just been released and had not been used much except for killing a few Nephilim with evil intentions, passed through the logistics space and found its way into Tia's hands. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu Mechanic. Author, Shan Mao Ai Chi. Chapter 370. Tia took out more than just one coil gun. She also put on 2 rocket engine boosters and immediately started running towards Andariel. "I'm telling you," the bomb girl shouted as she started running, "Brother Lu, it is and can only be my mount." As she shouted the last word, she jumped into the air with all her strength and immediately turned on the power of the rocket engine that had been ignited, flying straight towards Andariel like a cruise missile. Forget it, I can't explain it to you clearly." Sarah didn't know what to say because of the bomb girl's warning words, which were not sure whether they were colored or ordinary. She tightened the spear in her hand and rushed towards Andariel. "You're just in time," she said. "Help me contain this big guy, I'll go get a huge beast." After saying that, she glanced at Tia who was flying in the air, and snorted, "Is that okay?" Okay. Tia in the air did not forget to aim at Andariel and fired coil-accelerated tungsten alloy armor-piercing bullets. "As long as you don't fight with me, you can have any monster as a mount, including Andariel himself." Originally, they were talking nonsense to relieve their mood in the high-pressure and tense battle. To put it bluntly, they were just talking nonsense for fun, and the words in their mouths were actually meaningless. But at this point, Tia unexpectedly felt that it was a great idea to let Sarah Andariel take Toxicandariel as a mount. She looked at Sarah, who was charging at toxic Andariel over there, and she couldn't help but laugh. "Don't be like that. Let's talk it over." Sarah got goosebumps when she saw her like that, and hurriedly stopped her. "Don't laugh like that. You've been corrupted by your Ruger." "Hey, why do you have anything to do with me?" Ruger was using armor-piercing discarding sabos to make holes in Andariel's body, but he didn't expect that the two women would bring him in again while talking. As a result, the two women who had just been talking to each other turned their heads to look at him, and almost shouted at the same time, "Any objections, X2? No, no. Women, even if they are reincarnated demons, they still can't reason." Ruger could only shake his head helplessly and continue his struggle. Although the three of them were talking nonsense, their cooperation was quite tight. Whether it was Sarah's dragon spear or Ruger's 105mm armor-piercing discarding sabos, they could cause enough threatening damage to Andariel. Although Tia's coil gun tungsten alloy armor-piercing projectile has a small caliber, it has a high speed and high kinetic energy, and the actual threat to Andariel is not low. Of course, due to the problem of energy consumption, Tia generally does not turn the output power to the maximum, but chooses the rapid-fire mode. In this way, the overall power of her tungsten alloy armor-piercing projectile is infinitely close to a 57x 670mm rapid-fire anti-aircraft artillery projectile with a muzzle velocity of 1040 meters per second. Projectile refers to pre-fragmented, programmable, and proximity-fused ammunition. It is not a reference to some unspeakable game between three people. Although this level of power cannot be compared with the 105mm armor-piercing discarding sabo, APTS, it is enough to harass the venomous Demon King and prevent her from concentrating on dealing with the other two. After all, if it is not enough, she only needs to put a few more high-quality magic gems in the coil gun energy chamber, and then increase the launch power, and it will only take a few minutes to fire a tungsten core armor-piercing bullet at 10 times the speed of sound. It is hard to say which one of that thing and Luger's APTS is a greater threat to Andariel. In short, when Sarah changes her mount and adjusts the direction to accumulate energy, Luger will fire cold cannons on the side. When Luger reloads, Sarah will turn around and rush back again. There is a lack of resources, so she relies on Tia's eye-poking and kick in the crotch harassment to buy time. In general, except that Tia's rocket engine booster fuel is used up and the speed can no longer be maintained above 100 meters per second, the situation against Andariel can be said to be very good. But on the other hand, the three high-level commanders have all gone to the front line to fight, and ROG support troops behind are somewhat troublesome. At this time, the tide of monsters rushing out of the catacombs has almost pressed Andariel's front line. In order to allow the three to have enough space to fight Duan, the three-line self-propelled mortars no longer bombarded the direction of the catacombs, but instead focused their attack on the 200-meter area to the east of Andariel. The purpose was to allow as few catacomb monsters as possible to rush over to support Andariel. However, the one operating the self-propelled mortars at this time was not the super genius gunner, Tia Max, but several rogue gunners who had just been replaced from the Inuk heavy machine guns and were forced to take on the task after simple training. They used the simple experience left by Tia to correct the trajectory and re-aim, and they did a pretty good job. But they were limited to reading from the script and could not exert their strength beyond the outline. Originally, it was nothing for them to continue bombarding the catacombs. The trajectory of the mortar was a parabola with an extremely high curvature, which meant that it was hundreds of meters in the air most of the time. But when they changed their target to 200 meters east of Andariel, a new problem arose. That is, these mortar shells will just fly over Andariel's head before they hit the target, and the flying speed is very slow and the flying altitude is not high. So, Andariel just waved her claws at the sky while fighting with Ruger and the other two, and those tens or even hundreds of kilograms of high explosive bombs were dismantled in advance. Because those shells are old models with delayed fuses, after being cut into several sections by the poison claws in mid-air, if you are lucky, part of the explosives near the detonator will explode. Probably only 1/3 or even less of the original fragments will fly around. If you are unlucky, the detonator itself carries almost negligible military explosives such as passivated RDX, and it explodes in the air like a large firecracker, creating a firework with extremely poor light and shadow effects and average smoke effects, and that's all. As a result, Andariel, in his busy schedule, actually worked part-time as an active defense system to deal with mortar shells, and directly stopped all the shells of several mortars. At this stage, it can be said that the self-propelled mortars of the third line of defense of the rogue have been ineffective for 2 or 3 minutes. This is another important reason why the sea of monsters in the catacombs is accumulating more and more and more. Because of the chain reaction caused by this incident, the pressure on the rogue troops is increasing, and the ammunition consumption of each unit is also rising sharply. If this continues, it will take a few minutes for the rogues to evacuate all lines and return to the monastery gate camp for logistics replenishment before they can come back to fight.